And the Roundup resistant seeds that were created, the Bt cotton is a cotton with a toxic gene in it. And it's supposed to control the bollworm pest, but the bollworm has become resistant. New pests have been created. And on the basis of our field surveys, where we actually go and ask farmers how much are they spraying, farmers in Vidarbha, in the central part of India, where 4,000 farmers are taking their lives every year, 13 times increase in pesticide sprays. In the United States, where Roundup ready crops have spread, crops have now become resistant. Weeds have become resistant to Roundup. And 50 million acres of land are overtaken by superweeds that can't be controlled by Roundup. Monsanto is now giving $12 per acre to farmers to say, go get more lethal weedicides, herbicides. Agent Orange, which was sprayed in Vietnam, is being sprayed on the farms of the United States. This technology was brought with 3 myths. First, you're going to get more food. It's not true. There's no yield gain at all. Second, this would control pests. What we've got is super pests. Third, it would control weeds. What we've got is super weeds. And what does Monsanto do? Exactly what the Wall Street gamblers did. First they created derivatives, and then they created securitization, where they bundled up all these totally unreliable instruments. And the more unreliable it became, they would create more and more removed instruments. So I noticed they had debt obligations, collateral debt obligations. If it didn't work, they squared it. And if it didn't work, they cubed it. Similarly, when Monsanto's Roundup doesn't work, they put 2 genes of Roundup. When the Bt doesn't work, they put 2 genes of Bt. Now they're trying to put 3 genes of Bt. And they have something called Smart Stacks 8 stack corn, which has 4 herbicide-resistant genes and 2 Bt toxic genes. Einstein had warned us that insanity, the sign of insanity, is to do the same thing over and over again and expect a different outcome. Now, whether it be non-sustainable technologies like genetic engineering or unreliable economic instruments of financial speculation, doing the same thing again and again is not going to solve the problem. But what we've watched in the last 2 years of the financial crisis is every time the banks get citizens and countries into problems, the banks get bailed out and the citizens get abandoned. Every time a genetically engineered crop fails, instead of recognizing the failure and promoting more reliable systems like ecological agriculture, you get a push for more concessions to push GMOs at faster levels. But it isn't just the ecological crisis and the economic crisis that are totally interlinked that we face. We face a deep cultural crisis. And for me, the cultural crisis is manifold. One aspect of that crisis is our inability to understand how to live on this earth. Another aspect of the cultural crisis is in a highly integrated world of deep diversity, to not be able to think in terms of diversity. And a tragic outcome of a threat from diversity is that young man in Oslo who shot his own brothers and sisters because he was afraid of diversity. He saw immigrants as a threat. And he saw those in Norway who supported immigration as his enemies. I remember Samuel Huntington wrote this fat book that became the guide for US foreign policy for a short time. Samuel Huntington's book, he wrote in The Clash of Civilization, I can only know who I am if I know who I hate. I'd like him to go talk to a mother. And a mother will say, I can only know who I am. when I know whom I love and whom I'll give my life for. We've built up such a deep, alienated idea of who we are. And that cultural crisis, if it allowed to deepen, will make it impossible for us to be fully human. And if we are not able to reclaim our deep humanity with all its diversity and yet its commonalities, we will not be able to design a future for our species. And finally, of course, we have a political crisis, which is what all the unrest in the world is speaking about. You know, we've had generations of social movements. We've had long-term ecology movements. We've had the women's movement. But the new movements of discontent are not so clearly defined. Many of them are erupting only because people feel enough is enough. They don't even know clearly how to articulate what they're seeking, which is why the response is, oh, people don't know what they're asking for. They know what they're asking for, but they can't articulate it. And the political crisis is linked, in my view, to this oxymoron that's been created over the last 2 decades of globalization. Globalization was the creation of deregulated commerce, which basically means no limits on commercial activity and commercial actors, no limits on corporations. And in the case of the United States, this has gone so far that they had a ruling earlier this year in which corporations challenged the limits of donations of money for electoral campaigns, and argued that limits on their funding candidates was an interference of free speech. Now, once human beings have made the error of treating corporations as legal persons, then that legal person stealing our democracy becomes the free speech of that legal person. And so much of the chaos we see in the US around decision-making being totally stalled is around this error. The oxymoron that's been created around this is called free market democracy. And the reason it's an oxymoron is a free market means the rule of corporations by corporations for corporations. Democracy means the rule of people by people for people. Now, if you have a rule of corporations, you've got to destroy the rule of the people. You've got to necessarily undermine democracy in its content. And free market democracy is now creating a tension, a very deep tension in representative democracy. Because representation has become representation of wealth. It's no more representation of people. That's the big debate taking place on the streets of India right now, codified in the language of corruption. But it's really about the corporation, about the concentration of unaccountable wealth in the hands of a few. The fact that these few years have thrown out a handful of oligarchs that control every sector of the economy and buy those sectors through bribes, whether it was the telecom scam, or it was the Commonwealth Games, or the mining issue, which across our country is devastating both our ecosystems, our tribals, and our democracy.